Hello and welcome to the Roundtable Podcast. I am Shogun. Today we are going to be discussing the Iowa caucus, the New Hampshire primary, and Super Tuesday. And my special guest today is my dear friend, Mr. Richard Dawson, joining us for the second time as a special guest on the Roundtable Podcast. Before we get started, let me remind you to please join the party by following us on social media. We're on all platforms. And especially join us on the Roundtable Discord server. You can simply Google Roundtable Discord, or you can go to the Discord, public Discord thing, and search conspiracy theory. We should come up near the top there, Roundtable. You can also find our website, and we're coming soon to everything else, including Twitch, Minecraft, and you name it, so whatever. That being said, welcome Mr. Richard Dawson, and also thank you to our live audience and our recorders, Machina and Tech. How are you today, Richard?
Oh, pretty good. Ready for another podcast. Basically, the New Hampshire primary will be on Tuesday, and we still don't know who the winner is of the Iowa caucus. So that's been sort of a mess for the past week.
Right. So I make no pretense. I am by no means an expert in American politics at the local or national level. So I'm going to be relying on you to fill us in on the content and what we need to know. I'll just be sort of asking questions to guide the direction of the conversation. So I think the first place to start is, I understand there was some kind of snafu regarding this Iowa caucus. Seems to be FUBAR, fucked up beyond all recognition. Can you explain to us a little bit about what exactly happened and why, and then what it means?
Yeah, so there were a few problems. Problem number one is that, in the interest of transparency this year, the Iowa Democratic Party decided to report three numbers out of the Iowa caucus. And the problem that people have to realize is that in the Iowa caucus, the first part is everyone goes in and declares who they're supporting. Once that's completed, everyone, all the candidates who score below 15% are kicked out, and their supporters are obligated to recanvass with another party, which has with another candidate who has above 15%. So it's sort of a single transferable vote. And then, based on those last numbers, they divvy out how many delegates from their precinct are going to be sent to the Iowa Democratic Convention, which occurs sometime later in the spring and summer. And so this year, for the first time, the Iowa Democratic Party decided to report all three numbers. So they reported who won the first preference votes. They reported who won the second preference votes, and then they reported who won the state delegate equivalents. And the third number is what matters for who wins the Iowa caucus. And based on those three numbers, right now, Pete Buttigieg is in front with 564 delegates to Bernie Sanders' 562. So it's an incredibly close race. And for whatever reason, they decided to use an app. The precinct chairs decided to use an app to report the totals, and they didn't have any training to use the app. And so combine that with the close race, combine that with reporting all three numbers for the first time in history, combine that with the fact that the hotline to call in the votes was leaked and was jammed up with prank phone calls, and it was entirely a big recipe for disaster.
All right. So there's a timeline or an estimate for how long it'll be till this is all cleared up, or it's just ambiguous?
Well, the candidates have until, I want to say, noon or 1 o'clock tomorrow to request a recanvass. Now, the problem with that is that it just came out a few hours ago that the Iowa Democratic Party said even if there are errors in the caucus worksheets, those can't be corrected during the recanvass, which makes no sense. So the official Democratic Party line is that even if there are errors, those errors still have to be, those errors can't be corrected.
I see. So what do you think are the ramifications, implications, and consequences of all this?
Well, a few things. Number one, I think that the race going forward is going to be between Pete Buttigieg, Bernie Sanders, and Joe Biden, if Joe Biden can recover in the South Carolina primary, which occurs later on in the month. I think Elizabeth Warren is gone. I think really it's really a three-person race now, and Joe Biden has really proven himself to be close to the edge of dropping out because he came in. All indications are that he came in fourth in Iowa. He's probably going to come in third or fourth in New Hampshire on Tuesday, and so he's behind in Nevada. And so if he doesn't win in South Carolina, then he's done. If he wins in South Carolina, then he has a remote chance to win the most delegates going forward. But in the Super Tuesday polls so far, such as California, Sanders has been up in the majority of the states.
All right. So, is there any other points that need to be made about the Iowa caucus? I know that was part of the theme of the podcast. It seems like we've covered what happened, what it ultimately means. But was there any other fallout in terms of media, in terms of how maybe the opposing party has maybe spun this to their advantage? I've seen some memes kind of saying this whole thing kind of discredits the Democrats altogether, kind of thing. I mean, how much of a blow is this kind of confusion to their brand?
Well, to the National Democrats, it's a small blow. I think the bigger blow is to the Iowa caucus, in general, in that I wouldn't. You're going to see increased calls to get rid of the Iowa caucus or to change the Iowa caucus to a primary, and that especially with a increasing diversity of the U.S., having a primary in a state which is 90% white and doesn't reflect the diversity of the overall United States, that having Iowa go first is less and less important. And so I'm not sure this will be the last Iowa caucus, but if that is a result, it wouldn't be too surprising. Because if you want to be first, you have to have a process which goes smoothly, and you can't have you can't have a process which even 1 week after it's done, we still don't know who the winner is.
Right. So this is sort of a side note, but you said Buttigieg is in the lead, correct?
He's in the lead by 0.1%. So right now, the top four is Pete Buttigieg on 26.2, Bernie Sanders on 26.1, Elizabeth Warren on 18, and Joe Biden at 15.8. And so with only 0.1% separating Buttigieg and Sanders, and the fact that there are all these errors, it's really hard to tell who won, or it's really hard to tell who the actual winner is, especially when there's only 2 votes separating the two.
Right. So this is just interesting to me. So in the Democratic Party, the lead candidate is a homosexual. The second lead candidate is a socialist. The third lead candidate is a woman, and the traditional heterosexual male Christian, I believe, candidate is in last. So just do you have any comments on what this kind of means about the changing cultural landscape in America? Because it seems like not that long ago, it wouldn't have been conceivable that a homosexual, a woman, or a socialist would be seriously considered as the president of the United States. So, to what extent are we witnessing a sea change in American culture based on this?
Well, I'm not so sure you're representing a sea change in American culture broadly, but you are seeing the leftward trend of the Democratic Party, that the traditional mainstream Democrat came in fourth.
There are 60 million evangelists in the United States, too. That's Christian non-denominational evangelists.
See, so what do you think is the significance of that, NSA, or how does that pertain?
Well, that would be the, quote, opposition. They probably won't vote for a homosexual, but you never know. I mean, it's become more accepting. There's a lot of discussions with major religious figures about the evolution of their religious viewpoints and things like that. Like, Eric Weinstein did a good podcast with a rabbi discussing Judaism, and he also got a Islamic scholar on there too, discussing the modernization of these religions as far as what they're being viewed in the United States. But I mean, the traditional conservative evangelist viewpoint is, gay bad, right? But that's changing.
And especially building on that, Pete Buttigieg has been very open about his Christian faith. And so you're seeing that a lot, that people on the left are being much more open about how they see the future of Christianity in the U.S. versus it only belonging to right-wing evangelical Christians.
Right, and this is just speculation, of course, but if Pete Buttigieg were to be elected as president of the United States, do you think there would be any international backlash, for example, from the Muslim world? Do you think that this would be perhaps seen as, further evidence of the moral decadence and spiritual corruption of the great state in America? Now they have a homosexual president. Or do you think that, Saudi Arabia, all the Muslim world, United Arab Emirates, Turkey, etc., are okay with this now? Or is this going to have some kind of ideological blowback, or be some kind of will there be consequences for American cultural hegemony, or do you think the whole world has moved ahead as well? Or behind, or whatever, how you see it.
I think the world has moved ahead, and you've already had female leaders of the UK going back to Margaret Thatcher in 1979. You have gay leaders in Europe, and so they're still involved with diplomacy in the Middle East. So I don't think it would have that much of an impact.
All right. So moving on, is it time to move on then to one of our next topics, being the Super Tuesday and the, I'm sorry, I can't remember a second topic.
I would say that it would have a global impact, though, because, see, America is that shining star on the hill where they do a lot of experimentation with, because we're that free country with the freedoms that we have. So they test, they do a lot of these things here. I'm not saying this is a test necessarily, but if a gay president were the head of the United States, the shining star on the hill of the world's largest economy, it would have a reverberation throughout the world. I'm not sure if you review any of the UN talks and discussions on, like, female equality and things like that. That's still an issue in the third world, a big issue. So things like homosexuality will also be considered a huge issue in the third world. So there's many countries that it would have an effect on, that they would be able to then reference to them. So there is a geopolitical global equality reasoning to have a gay president in the United States too. It's not just based on, his merits.
Yeah, I see. So again, just last question here for Richard. Is there anything else you wanted to say or comment on as regards the Iowa caucus?
No, only that right now I'm leaning towards going forward, there's probably not going to be another Iowa caucus. This is probably the last one that they're going to do.
Are they going to replace it with anything, or do you think they'll just walk away from it?
They're probably just going to replace it with a primary.
So speaking of primaries, our second topic for today was the New Hampshire primary. I don't know if I'm embarrassed or not to admit I have essentially no idea what that even means. So can you fill us in on this and what its significance is?
Sure. So on Tuesday, the Democratic voters, as well as really anyone who wants to vote in the New Hampshire Democratic primary, will go vote on Tuesday, and they will decide who they think who they want to represent them as a Democratic nominee. And so in New Hampshire, let me pull up the polls. Right now, Sanders is ahead at 26%, and Buttigieg is at 21, followed by Warren at 13 and Biden at 12.7. And so we already see from here that Buttigieg has been surging after coming in most likely winning the Iowa caucus at 21, but he's still behind Sanders by 6 points, and Biden is still in fourth place. So everyone has sort of already written off Biden from coming in close in New Hampshire, and I would say if Warren, being one state away in Massachusetts, can do no better than third place, then her time in the race is probably quickly coming to an end.
I see. So, is there any other considerations here that you wanted to comment on other than we'll wait and see the results?
Not really. I would say look between Sanders and Buttigieg. If Buttigieg does pull out a victory, he'll have an incredible amount of momentum going into South Carolina, and if he's able to pull away the moderate vote from Biden, that he's likely going on to win the nomination. If Sanders can pull off if Sanders pulls it off, he's probably in the driving seat going into Super Tuesday.
Right. So this is just a side question, but can you explain to me what would be the main difference in America's future if Buttigieg wins as opposed to Sanders? I know this is a big question, but just some basic comments on, say Buttigieg wins, what would be the main policy implications for foreign domestic policy, culturally, politically, whatever, and then same with Sanders. So again, I don't follow this that closely. I mostly follow like international politics and conspiracy theories and things that kind of interest me more. But, what are some of the core policies of Buttigieg that distinguish him from the other candidates and from Sanders specifically? And then I'll ask you the same question in reverse.
Well, the problem with Buttigieg is that he's pulling out the Obama playbook of 2008, which is to be very vague on what policies you offer. And so the biggest policy Buttigieg has offered is Medicare for all who want it, which is essentially it's essentially a Medicare would be a Medicare buy-in program, and that everyone would be enrolled into Medicare. Whereas on the other hand, and also Buttigieg has declared himself a moderate. A lot of his hires for his campaign have been from Wall Street, have been from Goldman Sachs. So he's trying to play the moderate card. Whereas Sanders for many years has been a unabashed democratic socialist. He's called for a single payer program. In the 80s and 90s, he said that it would be good if the United States held an interest in banks and other important firms. And so if Sanders wins the nomination, it would be the first time in many, I think ever, that a major political party has nominated a socialist as their nominee.
Yeah, when he was in the military too, by the way, he was naval intelligence, kind of like what
Buttigieg,
surprise is.
Right. So now Sanders, just give us a breakdown of the ramifications of a Sanders presidency, broad strokes.
Well, I mean, it would be somewhat similar to Trump in that you would have an outsider who comes from a populist bent, but it's populism from the left. And so Sanders has a history over time of being very critical of media coverage of himself. The same with his supporters. I think Sanders is the only candidate who has a Wikipedia page dedicated to media bias against him. So you somewhat see where supporters are coming from, and you would see a lot of left-wing policies. I think Sanders has promised an executive order legalizing marijuana on day one. And I think you'd see a liberal use of executive orders the same way Trump has used executive orders, but it would be to push through progressive policies.
I see.
Yeah, I think he's pretty plastic, man, to be honest with you, which makes me think he is kind of an asset. I mean, there's the conspiracy circling around that he's an asset because of his intelligence ties and then the company he worked for had CIA ties. He apparently made claim that he botched an interview with the intelligence community as well, or would, you know. I just, he seems to be pushing out this, like, Trump bad like everyone else, and then these talking points of, like, whatever pleases, you know what I mean? Like, it's hard. He doesn't have anything uniqueness to him, so I'm just a little kind of like,
Right.
And so he definitely, like, if you ask Sanders what he thinks is the best run country, he'd probably say one of the Scandinavian countries like Norway or Denmark. So he's not a communist in the same lens as Cuba or China, but he does want to see the United States move away from laissez-faire capitalism to moving towards a more managed economies, such as the Scandinavians or even Canada.
Right.
And he'd likely be significantly to the left of even Trudeau.
Okay. And I know we covered this in our last politics podcast, but can you reiterate for us who you would prefer to see and why?
For the Democrats, I mean, at this point, you have to go with the candidates who are viable. So I think Warren is no longer viable. I think she might be a VP pick going forward, but I'd say probably Sanders, probably Sanders or Buttigieg. And if I had my personal pick, I'd probably say Sanders, just for the sole reason that the left wing of the Democratic Party has always accused the Democratic Party of picking moderate candidates who they believe will fare worse in a general election. So if the Democratic Party picks Sanders and truly gets behind him, it's sort of a put up or shut up moment for the left wing of the party, and that, all right, here's your chance to prove us wrong. If he gets wiped out in November, then, sit down and shut up. You had your chance.
yeah, in Steve Bannon's interview with Real Time with Bill Maher, he talks about Bernie. He actually likes Bernie, even though he's a total socialist, because he focuses on topics that no one else does, that the community behind him would focus on. And that's how Trump got so popular, is that he was focusing on the real issues, not this churn out from an Analytica type stuff. And that's kind of what Bernie does. He just goes all in and goes all out on whatever he wants. He doesn't pull punches.
Right. I mean, in getting more into political science, for the longest time, the United States didn't really have that much political polarization between the two major parties. And so the rule of thumb on how to win elections was the median voter theorem of, if you go to the position of the median voter and go a few voters over, you have your majority to get elected. The problem is, with increased polarization between the two parties, that theorem breaks down, and the way you get elected becomes more of a turnout battle of, you need to turn out your base more than the other party. And so becoming too moderate reduces your base's turnout. And if the other candidate hems much more towards your base, then they can get elected even if you pick more moderate positions.
Well, then let's get a billionaire and we'll start a new party. I mean, Germany has 3 parties right now. There's just many democracies around the world without a left and right only. Let's start a third party, and it'll be the anti-Mason. We'll bring back the anti-Masonic party. What do you think?
Well, the problem with Germany is that they have a mixed member proportional system, and so the constituencies there are not first past the post or majority wins. I want to say Canada is really the only party, or is really the only country with the first past the post, which has 3 major parties.
We have 4, but yeah, 3 major. Yeah, the Liberals, the Conservatives, the NDP, and the Bloc Québécois, right?
Right, but the bloc is more so because Canada has a weird situation where you have an ethnic group within Canada which sees itself as a separate entity within Canada, whereas the United States doesn't really have that. You might say that could be developing in the Southwest as the Spanish language takes greater hold. However, the problem there is that the immigrants are bringing in a language, whereas the Canadian language in Quebec has been there for close to 400 to 500 years. So saying that trying to compare the two becomes very difficult when you have one language which has been in place for 500 or so years, whereas the other state, the language is a language of immigrants.
Yeah, I wasn't actually trying to compare it. I was just simply noticing that we do indeed have 4. But you're right; it's a totally different
right. But I mean, others have been making that argument, and I think it's very important to point out. While it is similar in that you have regions of the United States which are moving away from having an area which is majority English, comparing the two is at times incredibly foolhardy.
I agree. I also personally think that the Bloc Québécois should not exist, and I think it is detrimental to national unity and, in some sense, a almost treasonous project by regards to the Quebec separation attempt. But that's a completely different subject, so we won't derail this to that. This is not about Canadian politics.
Well, I
just wanted to throw that out there to offend any French Canadian listeners we might have.
Québécois. Well, we have libertarian and some other stuff, and there's a quote, the Green Party, and then you can go independent and all this stuff, but there's really no movement of any, because anytime there's a movement of any kind of ideology, that just gets absorbed into the left or right. So it's kind of strange. I mean, if you look at the evolution through American politics, politic history, there's been other little parties that's sprout up every now and then.
I will say
the Masonic Party was actually a party too.
It was, and I do think America should have more than 2 parties. I think the idea of a 2-party system is sort of farcical and absurd, and I'm not saying a 3rd party would necessarily solve that problem, but it would certainly seem like a step in the direction of real democracy as opposed to 2 puppet politics. You know, the inherent dichotomy and dialectic of just simply left-right and red-blue is just so transparent. A third option would just complexify the real choice that people have, because having only 2 parties just naturally and obviously forces people to gravitate to one side or another and kind of pulls the country apart. It just, I don't know, it's problematic, but that's a more complex question than what we're getting into today, probably.
Right, and it's like even in Canada, the Bloc Québécois and the NDP have around plus or minus 10% of the seats in the House of Commons, whereas there are no other major parties in the U.S. Congress which have seats. The only exceptions are that Bernie Sanders and Angus King of Vermont and Maine are independents, and Justin Amash of the Republican Party resigned his membership in protest of Trump. And so, I mean, you've only got independents in the U.S. Congress, and all three of the independents usually have a party that they more or less belong to.
Right. So, quick reference here. We are also scheduled to discuss Super Tuesday. So are you ready to move on to this, or was there more you wanted to say first?
Nope, that should be good. So Super Tuesday is coming up on March the 3rd, and the reason it's called Super Tuesday is because of all of the majority, the greatest number of states vote on Super Tuesday. And so this year we have Alabama, Arkansas, California, Colorado, Maine, Massachusetts, Minnesota, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, Vermont, and Virginia, as well as the Democrats abroad. And so all of them will be voting on March the 3rd. Biden has been leading in a lot of the southern states because of his high levels of support with African American voters, and especially in Alabama, Virginia, and Tennessee, and that the majority of the Democratic voters there are going to be African American, and that's why Biden is out in front. Whereas on the other hand, in California, Colorado, Maine, Vermont, Sanders is out in front. And so if Biden is only concentrated within the southern states, him breaking out and becoming a viable national figure is going to be, we have to wait and see. But Biden is in trouble, and it's really going to come down between Sanders and Buttigieg. And because the Democratic primaries are proportional, if Sanders takes, if Biden takes a majority of what could have been Buttigieg voters, then all that does is work out to the benefit of Sanders.
I see. So you mentioned that Biden enjoys a high level of support from African American voters. Can you perhaps explain at all why that is the case?
Well, I mean, he was the vice president when Obama during the Obama presidency. So Biden has also given pretty good, great speeches to the NAACP leadership, and so it should be no surprise that he would be seen as having the support of the majority of African Americans. However, that support has been decreasing, and Sanders has been rising.
I see. So, was there anything else you wanted to comment on regarding Super Tuesday before we just turn over to perhaps further political discussion in general?
No, that should be all for now. I would look at the southern states and in all the states to see what the breakdown is between Biden and Buttigieg voters, and to see if one of the candidate, for the lack of a better word, steals the votes of another, which allows Sanders to rise.
And in terms of, okay, so thank you for that breakdown of these three important political topics. Appreciate it very much. And of course, as further political topics develop, we hope you'll be a recurring guest, be our political correspondent or expert for the roundtable. Would be great. So that being said, just a general sort of naive question on my part. Who do you know, this is all about who's going to take the Democratic leadership role, but who do you think is more likely to win overall, the left or the right, the Republicans or the Democrats? Which way is the cultural zeitgeist swinging these days? Are we moving as a nation, or are you moving as a nation to the left or to the right?
I think the nation as a whole is moving to the left. I would say if depending on who the candidate is chosen, I think if Biden is a nominee, he beats Trump, and I think if Buttigieg is chosen, Trump beats him easily. And if Sanders is chosen, I think Trump beats him, but I think it would be incredibly close.
Interesting. So, is there any other important issues culturally, politically developing that you've had your eye on or that you're researching these days?
No, the only other election which is going on, just finished yesterday, is the Irish election, in that the Irish nationalists, for the first time, might be in a position to form the government of Ireland. So, but we'll have to see going forward, because Ireland takes forever to count their votes.
Interesting. And this would lead to perhaps a secession attempt.
Well, I mean, it wouldn't lead to a secession attempt. That would all depend on how much of what goes on in Northern Ireland, because they are still a part of the UK. But if you do see a Sinn Féin nationalist government, you might see a lot of support for the separatists in Northern Ireland.
Okay, interesting. Well, as regards the three topics that we had laid out, you've given us a really good, succinct, and valuable breakdown of this. I don't have any particular politically inclined questions right now. Is there anyone in the room who does want to ask our guest any questions about American politics or other political topics while we have them here?
Going once, going twice.
Okay, if not, last offer or opportunity for you, Mr. Richard Dawson. Is there anything else you wanted to get off your chest, make the public aware of, or simply any closing remarks to use on this platform for the audience?
No, I just stay tuned. The current odds have Sanders winning the nomination, and a Trump versus Sanders race, one conservative populist versus a progressive populist. That would be a very interesting campaign, and that would change the game. That would change the game of American politics.
All right. Well, I think this one is short and sweet, and so thank you very much to our live audience. Thank you very much to our recorders, Mackin and Tech. Thank you for everyone listening to us on YouTube, on the Roundtable recorded content channel, on Podcast Addict, Podbean, Songs, SoundCloud, or all the other platforms we are either on or will soon be on. Please do remember to join us on the Roundtable Discord server. You can find us through Discord under the conspiracy tag, or you can simply Google Roundtable Discord. You can also find us on all social media. You can check out our website, which is also a forum community. Patreon, GoFundMe, if you want to support. And that being said, thank you again to my guest, Richard Dawson. Looking forward to our next episode, and grateful for your time, sir.